every photographer needs to know how they can leverage the technology in their cameras in order to take the load off of them so that they can focus more on getting a better image. For the most part, your camera is smarter than you are, and it's smarter than you think in general, especially if you own a newer modern day mirrorless camera, say like the Sony A7 series or a Fujifilm or a Panasonic. Any of those newer cameras, the camera companies have taken time to actually make sure the camera can do some things on its own, and I think that every photographer needs to know how they can leverage the technology in their cameras in order to take the load off of them so that they can focus more on getting a better image. So before I go ahead and break this down for you guys, I want to show you two other photographers that are shooting in program mode and have excellent photos. So our first example here is a man named Xing Liu. When I first started watching him, he was shooting on a Fujifilm X-T2. I think this was maybe a year ago. And he was shooting nothing but auto. Let me see. You can see here he has, well, not nothing but auto, but he had two settings set to auto. So he has his ISO on auto, he has his shutter speed on auto, but he has the aperture on manual. That's just so he can get the maximum amount of background blur without the camera trying to change the aperture. So this is one example of a guy. Another example is another man named Kevin Mullins. He actually made an entire video why sometimes he shoots in program mode or automatic mode on his camera while he's shooting his wedding. You can sort of see how much of a skillful photographer he is, yet he shoots in program mode every now and then.
For example, here are a few images from the last wedding I shot, and yes, every single one of them taken on P mode. In this first one, while the bride is walking up to the church, I don't often see the vicar waiting in a very classical manner for the bride, and as soon as I saw him, I knew I wanted a shot. I didn't just want a picture of him though, I wanted to add the bride to the frame to give the image context. It's not tricky lighting and I don't need to shoot super slow or fast, but the moment evolved quickly, and by shooting in P mode, all I have to worry about is the vision. The camera does the rest.
Alright guys, so I want to go ahead and explain to you when it makes sense to shoot auto and when it doesn't make sense to shoot something in auto. So let's go ahead and break this down really quickly. So this is definitely not a video for beginning photographers, definitely something for more intermediate, but if you know anything about your camera has different settings. So you've got your wow, that is a thick boy right there. Hold on a minute. There we go. We got ISO, right? And then we have shutter. And then we have aperture. That is illegible AF, but whatever. So these three parameters can all be controlled manually, separately, or they can be controlled automatically by your camera. And so for an image like this, where I really wanted to get an entire landscape of the entire scene whilst having a subject here, I purposely wanted him to convey motion in this photo, and I also wanted to get a landscape. So my aperture was at about f8 and my shutter was, I don't even know what my shutter was at, but it was at a very, let's just put low. It was very slow. Let's put slow actually. Very slow shutter. And my ISO was probably at about 200 on my camera. So all of these parameters were controlled manually by me. Here's why. I understood exactly what I wanted to get in my photo. I wanted to convey motion. Check. Put a slow shutter speed. I also wanted a very low light landscape. It was very dark when I took this photo, and the slower you make that shutter, the more light that will gather on your sensor. So the slower shutter, more light, so it made the photo brighter. And I didn't want the photo to be super noisy or super grainy, So I made the ISO at its base level on my camera at 200. That made the image super pristine, super clear, no noise. And I also wanted everything to be in focus. So aperture was set at f8. The larger that aperture number is, the more you'll have in focus. So that's why the trees are in focus, just as the concrete right in front of me is in focus. So for something like this, it makes 100% sense to just step back, or not step back, but step in and control everything by yourself so that you get the photo that you desire. This is a way that I would control my cameras at times. Here is another low light landscape. This is a blurry image because it's compressed, but yeah, you can just see this is sort of a photo type that I love doing. I love doing these sort of landscapes. This was at the Athens skate park, and you can sort of see what happened. I did the exact same thing as I did in the last one. So let's talk about when it makes sense to shoot in complete auto. So in a situation like this, like we said, we already had aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. For something like this, I wanted everybody in the scene to be in focus, so I had my camera set around f8, right? And so for the rest, I didn't really care. I didn't really care about how grainy it was. I didn't really care about the shutter speed because I knew it was bright, and I knew that as long as it's bright, that shutter speed isn't going to be slow. It isn't going to slow down. So I set my ISO to auto, I set my shutter speed to auto, and then what you get is capturing the moment. And you aren't concerned about what settings you're on, you're just capturing the moment. And that is the focus of something like this. Now, of course, there are other situations where you just don't want to shoot in auto, and this is another situation like this. This is a photographer named Benjamin Kanarick. He shoots for Vogue a lot, and this is a mixed lighting photo. This photo is mixed with a little bit of natural light, and it's mixed with a strobe. And if you don't know what a strobe is, it's basically a flash. And so for a situation like that, you don't really want to be shooting on auto. First of all, you're shooting for a magazine, so you definitely don't want to push your ISO too high. You don't want it to be on auto. Even with that being said, you can always limit your camera. You can tell your camera how much you want it to push. So if you want your camera, when you have it in auto, to only go from ISO 200 to 400, you can tell it to do that. But in a situation like this, you want to be completely sure of what you're getting. So you would have your ISO in manual. You'd probably have your aperture at something like f8, maybe f5.6, just judging by how much is in focus here. Maybe it was like f4 because the background is quite blurred. It's also a medium format camera, which is a larger sensor, which means more background blur. So who knows what this was really shot at? I certainly don't know. But I'm pretty sure everything was very, very intentional with this photo. So it makes a lot of sense to shoot manual for something like this. But if you are just having fun doing your thing, even just shooting a very fast-paced environment and your light is constantly changing, then maybe it's a good idea to allow your camera to take care of it. And now I sort of just want to dive into a more personal example of a situation where I had to implement the automatic parameters on my camera to help me in a situation. Does that make sense? We began shooting around sunset, and at this time the sun was going down really, really fast. So every 5 minutes it was getting darker and darker and darker, and I realized that what I was doing is trying to control my camera manually, and I was missing shots. And of course, this is, you know, a different story for a professional who's been shooting manual all his life. But as a person who is a little bit younger, a little bit newer to photography, and a person who invested in an incredibly expensive camera, you might as well learn how to leverage the technology to your own benefit instead of shooting in the same ways that the older folks shoot in. And I'm not trying to be offensive or anything, but these cameras don't have a 14 frames per second burst mode for no reason. You should utilize it. Just because a professional tells you, oh, that's too much, you don't need all that. That's way too much. What do you need that for? You're supposed to know when to take the photo at the right time. Well, duh, but the whole point of technology is to make your job easier, not harder. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Hope you learned something, and well, before I say I'll see you in the next one, if you want to know how I created this video, check out my live stream on Twitch, and you can see quite a bit of how I do what I do, and specifically how I created this video. Yeah, link in the description below, and yeah, now I will see you in the next video.